What the devil is this? What's going on? It was obvious that something was very wrong because Samantha, who is typically cool and collected, was agitated and raising her voice. Tension immediately spread among the other staff members, even among me, who had only been here a few months. We hurried over to assemble next to Samantha's desk after a brief period of stillness during which everyone exchanged anxious looks. She appeared to be trembling a little as she stared at the computer screen, her mouth moving silently. I never thought our bank would experience such a situation. I reasoned that since I'm concealing my actual history here, I shouldn't be involved. Nevertheless, I couldn't watch helplessly as my coworkers, with whom I had been through many highs and lows over the past few months, faced difficulties. Tate is my name. I work for the bank's risk management department in the credit risk management division, and I'm 39 years old. This is a regional bank branch. I don't work for a huge bank. I don't have a girlfriend, and I'm single. I had considered getting married at one point, but at this age, I don't think it's really essential anymore. I'm happy to concentrate only on my work and am not actively looking for a spouse. Now, most people think of a person behind a counter when they think of a banker. Although it's not my job, that's not incorrect. I suppose you could say that I'm more of a background supporting, behind-the-scenes kind of person. Banks handle money, thus we need to be very careful. It goes without saying that controlling finances is important, but so is managing consumer data. It is absolutely unacceptable for any personal information to be leaked. In the risk management department, it is our responsibility to concentrate on these types of risk prevention strategies. A bank's loans in particular carry credit risk, which, if improperly handled, could jeopardize the bank's continued existence. It necessitates exact control and advanced skill because of this. As I previously stated, I work at this bank as an ordinary employee without a title, but it isn't because I've been aimlessly wandering around till I was 39. I held the steady position of section chief at my prior employer. They even offered me a managerial position when I arrived at this bank, but I declined. I had never had a position in a bank before, and I was aware that the financial establishment would not be pleased with someone like me hired for my abilities. What do you think would have happened if I had also taken a managerial position? Conflicts annoy me, and I detest witnessing arguments. I decided to start off as a regular employee in a position that wouldn't cause any trouble because I just want to live a calm life. I couldn't handle the constant competition for promotions and the small-scale power conflicts, even at my former employer. And I was the one who had to put up with the late-night overtime and business travels since I was a single man working with married coworkers. Leaving the staff to quarrel-like way annoyed me, but I don't intend to be critical of those who have families. That's actually the job of the supervisor. That was a big factor in my decision to change careers. I decided to try my hand at selling myself when I learned that this risk management department was hiring, and I was pleasantly surprised to be hired. My arrival here was entirely coincidental. I didn't want to upset anyone, and I didn't want to work in the toxic environment of my previous job ever again. That was my only concern. I began working at this bank a few months ago. The workload was excessive given the nature of the department, but it was insignificant in comparison to my previous position. I could leave on time after the task was finished, and no one made me put in excessive overtime. My life was a lot more satisfying because this was typical here, when it hadn't been for me previously. It seemed like they were taking advantage of your sense of purpose at my former job, where the more competent you were, the more work they threw at you. I owe it all to Samantha Kirkland, my direct supervisor and the head of the credit risk management department, who created the atmosphere I had been dreaming of. Her position was gained by sheer competence at the age of 36. In my opinion, she is completely capable and devoid of flaws. When you combine that with her beauty, nobody could match her. Everyone should handle their own work. That's fundamental. Samantha loved that phrase the most. If you can't handle your own tasks, what are you even doing? Was her way of putting it. Naturally, there were many that disagreed with Samantha, but I don't mind that viewpoint. Mason, a coworker who was 12 years my junior, was one of them. When he was 27, he frequently griped about Samantha during our downtime. Samantha lacks a sense of teamwork, much like the Iron Lady. As the team leader, it is her responsibility to supervise the workload, identify each team member's strengths, and assign assignments accordingly. Rather, she does everything by herself, and we seldom have any opportunity to gain experience or demonstrate outcomes. I take assuming you agree with me, Tate. Not knowing how to respond, I just smiled awkwardly. Samantha wasn't wrong. In fact, most people thought she was pretty spot on, though no one wanted to say it out loud. That said, Mason wasn't entirely wrong either. We are a team. If someone was slacking off, it would be a different story, but in our credit risk management section, everyone was earnest and hardworking. Slacking off didn't even seem to cross their minds, so the idea that it would be faster if we split the work among everyone made sense too. Not wanting to take sides, I just took a sip of my coffee and said, "Yeah, I guess so." Mason kept inviting me for coffee during breaks, and each time, it became a routine for him to gripe about Samantha. Apparently, he wasn't too fond of her. While Mason was a capable employee, I always felt he had a bit of a lazy streak. He wasn't slacking, but there were times when I'd see him daydreaming at his desk. To Mason, it was probably just a short break, but Samantha was strict about that and would often criticize him for it. He'd frequently mutter, "Man, she really hates me." A few more weeks passed. Recently, there had been an increase in loan requests, which meant our credit risk management section was swamped. We had to be cautious about issuing loans, but even more importantly, we had to keep a close eye on the loans we had already issued. If a borrower went bankrupt, recovering the loan would be difficult, so knowing when to cut off a loan was crucial. Because of this, we were doing more work outside the office, and I found myself working overtime for the first time in a while. Technically, I had finished my own tasks. Even if I had to work overtime, it only took about an hour to wrap things up. But the reason I stayed late every night was to help out the others. No one asked me to, but I wanted to do it. The people here had been so kind, patiently teaching me when I didn't know what I was doing. There was no reason not to help them when they were struggling. Mason was one of those people. Whenever I helped him out, he'd say, "Tate, you're a lifesaver. I'm so sorry for causing you trouble these past few days. Thanks for your help. It didn't feel bad to be appreciated." I mentioned earlier that Samantha was strict with Mason because he took more breaks than others. But I knew something. After Mason took his short efficiency breaks, he worked harder and faster than anyone else. Even though I'd only been here a few months, I could tell that Mason was dedicated to his work. And despite being a lonely, almost 40-year-old single guy, he was always kind to me. That went for the rest of the team too. Naturally, I wanted to help out and work together, but there was always someone to spoil that atmosphere. Of course, it was Samantha. "Mason, isn't that your job? I've seen you sneaking in those little breaks. If you've got time to take all those short rests, you should be working. If you were more efficient, Tate wouldn't have to help you with tasks he's already finished." Mason's face tightened, and he looked like he was about to argue. I quickly stepped in to mediate. "Samantha, it's not like that. I'm doing this because I want to. As you can see, I have no wife or kids, and I'm free to help out. Is it so bad that I want to assist my colleagues?" At that, Samantha went silent. She looked like she wanted to say something more, but eventually just nodded and returned to her desk, saying it was fine as long as I didn't mind. I let out a sigh of relief, but as expected, Mason couldn't keep quiet. "What's her problem? Seriously, it's not like I'm slacking off. I just took a 5-minute break to rest my eyes, and she's giving me grief over it. Come on, calm down. She doesn't mean any harm. Samantha's just trying to make sure everyone can leave on time. She's willing to play the bad guy to make that happen." As I tried to calm Mason down, he fell silent, clearly understanding what Samantha was thinking in his own way. It was almost 6:00 p.m., so I hurried to finish my work. Just as I took some of Mason's tasks to move them to my desk, something unusual happened. Samantha raised her voice. What is this? What's happening?" The fact that the usually calm and composed Samantha was flustered and shouting made it clear that something was seriously wrong. Even though I'd only been here a few months, I could sense it, and the tension spread among the other staff members. After exchanging tense glances, everyone rushed over to gather near Samantha's desk. Samantha was staring at her computer screen, her mouth moving wordlessly, and her body seemed to tremble slightly. What happened? Peeking from a distance, I saw the bank's internal security system flashing a warning on her screen. Sensing trouble, I ran over to Samantha and asked quickly, "What happened?" I got a notification about a security software update, so I clicked the link to log in, but I couldn't log in no matter how many times I tried. Then the system started lagging, and now this warning message popped up. At first glance, the website looked like the usual security site, and I even confirmed it was using HTTPS. But something about the logo at the bottom felt off. Before I could say more, the screen suddenly went black. From behind me, I heard worried murmurs from the others who had been watching. "This is bad. It might be malware. Unauthorized access." With that, everyone's eyes turned to me, and for good reason. For us, a data breach involving customer information was unthinkable. People have probably seen companies apologizing in press conferences after hackers leaked personal information following unauthorized access. That's likely what everyone was imagining. For a bank, trust is everything. And right now, that trust was under threat. It seemed like someone had tricked Samantha into entering her credentials on a fake site, and now they were using those credentials to steal data. Whoever was behind this was highly skilled. This must be a professional hacker with advanced skills. Now that they've breached our system, there's a good chance they've planted a back door. We can't handle this ourselves anymore. We need to contact a forensic investigation team immediately. We were out of time. Every passing minute counted. The hacker was extracting personal data. But this is a bank, and we fortified our defenses for such threats. The more sensitive the information, the stronger the protections. Breaking through wouldn't be easy, even for a skilled hacker. Although everyone was initially stunned, these were seasoned professionals. Mason, leading the charge, said, "I'll go report to the manager, Kent," and with that, the team sprang into action despite the underlying panic. Everyone was doing their best to help. Some called headquarters, others contacted the branch manager, and some were already reaching out to security firms to arrange forensic analysis. While the rest of us were moving quickly, Samantha remained frozen, her eyes wide with fear. She muttered, "What should I do? What should I do?" seemingly unable to process what was happening. There was no time to explain again. I wanted to offer her some encouragement, but I knew mere words wouldn't be enough. There was only one thing to do. I steeled myself and shouted, "You're not the type of person who gives up that easily." My words seemed to snap Samantha back to reality. Her eyes regained focus, and she looked determined once again. She slapped her own cheeks as if to snap herself out of it, and the panic in her expression vanished. "That's right. What am I doing in this state? There's work that needs to be done. I need to get a grip," she said. That's the resolute Samantha I knew. But just as things started to settle, another problem arose. Mason and another employee contacted the security company to request a forensic investigation. However, since it was after hours, there were only a few staff members available to respond. Although the investigation could still proceed due to their 24-hour response system, there was a logistical problem. This is a regional bank branch in a rural area. Even if a representative were dispatched immediately, it would take at least 30 minutes for them to arrive. Ideally, we shouldn't touch the computer until the specialist arrives, but we couldn't afford to wait. I started thinking fast. Why did I come to this bank, leaving my past behind to start over? It only took a few seconds, but it felt like I had been thinking for hours. Finally, I made up my mind. Without saying a word, I sat down in front of Samantha's desk and placed my hands on the keyboard. Tate, what are you doing? They told us not to touch anything. Samantha protested. I responded calmly, overriding her words. The bank is in trouble. Let me do what I can. I can't just sit back and watch. Samantha's eyes wavered at my words. No one knew what the right course of action was at this point, but if someone could lead us to the correct solution, they had to act. Forensic analysis of ransomware requires advanced log analysis skills, technical expertise, and experience. In other words, an average security engineer wouldn't be able to handle it. That's why companies usually rely on outside specialists for situations like this. In larger corporations, there may be in-house engineers, but due to cost and logistics, a small rural bank like ours didn't have such a luxury. That much was common sense for someone like me. This was probably why the hacker had targeted our branch in the first place. Once they gained access here, it might only be a matter of time before they could breach the headquarters' critical databases. The attacker was more formidable than we had imagined. I swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and started typing on the keyboard. Samantha moved to stop me, but Mason shook his head, holding her back. Everyone else, though worried, could only stand by and watch as I worked. The tension was palpable, but adrenaline coursed through me, and my fingers moved faster and faster on the keyboard. After a while, I finally raised my head, letting out a sigh. Immediately, questions came at me from all directions. What happened? I don't really understand what you were doing, but is it over? Someone asked. I smiled and explained the situation. I managed to secure the important personal data. I moved it to a safe server, so that should be fine. However, the attacker was quick, and there's a possibility that they extracted some past contract data. The data extracted wasn't sensitive customer information, just basic contract details from past agreements. While there was a small leak, it wasn't the kind of disaster that would force us to apologize to our customers on our knees. Upon hearing that, the tension in the room lifted. Some collapsed into their chairs, while others let out shouts of joy. But Samantha remained solemn, staring at me intently. Not long after, the representative from the security company arrived. I explained the situation and asked them to double-check everything. The representative looked surprised, but quickly confirmed the results, muttering, "This is incredible. As you mentioned, the virus threat appears to be neutralized. We didn't detect any backdoors either. However, considering the possibility of future attacks, well, it looks like I won't be needed here. I'm impressed, Tate. So, this is where you've been." "Yes, well, it's been a while." "How have you been?" I replied. Since the representative and I knew each other from before, the rest of the team watched our conversation in puzzlement. Shortly afterward, Mr. Oli, the bank president, along with some executive officers, arrived. Having heard about the incident, they bombarded the representative with questions, who reassured them that everything was under control and briefly explained the next steps before leaving. Mr. Oli and the executives, clearly busy, said they would explain any consequences later and left. It was already past 9:00 p.m. Then, at long last, Mason turned to me with a curious look and asked his question. "So, what's the deal here?" I kept quiet because I didn't want to interfere. "But Tate, you're not just a regular guy, are you?" Mason, always sharp, had suspected from the moment I joined that I wasn't an ordinary employee. "Yeah, I've had my suspicions. I mean, someone who's 39 and had a solid career before starting as a regular employee. That was a red flag. Plus, you seem to know that security company rep pretty well. So, Tate, your previous job was as a security engineer, right?" Mason's confident declaration made me burst out laughing. perhaps finally releasing the tension that had built up. "Right on," I said, and with that, I decided to reveal my past to Mason. I hadn't planned on telling anyone, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to share it with Mason and the others in our department. Even though everyone still had work left to do, they indulged me for a few minutes as I shared my story. As we all chatted and laughed together, I realized something. Samantha wasn't part of the group. The next day, as soon as I arrived at work, Samantha called me over. I had a feeling I knew what this was about, so I followed her without asking. It was fall, and the chill in the air made a cup of hot coffee taste just right. We sat on a bench in the park behind the bank, and without a word, Samantha handed me a cup of black coffee. Even though Samantha wasn't fond of black coffee and had mentioned liking sweet things, it seemed she knew that I preferred mine black. I thought to myself that despite her tough exterior with Mason, she must actually be looking out for him as well. In fact, I had heard talk of Mason being up for a promotion. As I pondered these things and took a sip of the coffee she gave me, Samantha finally spoke. "I overheard something, Tate. You used to be a hacker, didn't you?" "Well, most people call it white hat hacker these days. Technically, a hacker isn't a bad term, but when people mean it in a bad way, they call it a cracker." "Oh, sorry. I caught myself before I went too far with technical explanations." But Samantha, smiling in a way I had never seen before, said, "Go on." Since we still had time before work started, and she seemed genuinely interested, I decided to share a bit more. I explained the technical terms I had used the day before and told her the same story I had shared with Mason and the others. The term hacker often brings negative connotations, but in reality, it's not inherently bad. Put simply, it refers to someone highly skilled in computers. A cracker is someone who uses that knowledge for malicious purposes, like the unauthorized access we dealt with yesterday. Since most people can't distinguish between the two, they started calling ethical hackers white hat hackers. I'm not bragging, but back in the day, I was considered a genius white hat hacker. I loved math and physics as a kid and was the kind of elementary schooler who'd say Isaac Newton was my favorite person. I was so into the sciences that I chose Fermat's last theorem as the topic for my thesis. Looking back, those days were really fun because I felt like I could do anything. I was proud of using my skills to help people, which is why I pursued a career as a security engineer. I wanted to become skilled enough to work as a freelancer in my 20s. That was my goal. So, I threw myself into planning, implementing, operating, and maintaining security systems, even training younger engineers. I obtained certifications like CISSP, which is highly regarded in the industry, and CISM, because I wanted to specialize in security. By my mid-30s, my career was smooth sailing. Given my track record, I was supposed to take a key position at headquarters. But I turned it down, saying, "I believe it's crucial to have someone at rural branches who can respond to security issues immediately." In my experience, branches are often targeted, and important data has been extracted from simple work computers. Crackers know how to exploit security holes, and they're well aware of companies' manpower shortages and cost-cutting measures. That's why I was assigned to this rural branch. But that wasn't the only reason. There was something else. A lingering feeling that brought me here, something unresolved. "Samantha Nash, do you remember me?" I asked. Samantha's eyes widened in surprise when I mentioned her maiden name, but then she quickly softened her expression and said, "So, it was you. You were that engineer back then." A moment of silence passed as I reflected on the past. It was several years ago, long before I came to this bank. At the time, I had been working for a different company when we received a request from a business run by a man named Mr. Nash. He wanted to discuss improving his company's security, and I was assigned to handle the project. However, just before the meeting, Mr. Nash suddenly passed away due to illness, and his daughter Samantha, who had been groomed as his successor, took over the company. Just like I had a past, so did Samantha. Before becoming department head, she was once the president of her father's company. Samantha had managed to run things at the top after her father's sudden death, but things did not go so well. It was likely that being the daughter of the president, Mr. Nash, she faced backlash. After all, a young woman with little experience had easily taken over the role of president simply because of her lineage. When the bank cut off funding, the company's finances quickly plunged into the red. Even so, Samantha, determined to keep the company her father built alive, tackled everything with a positive attitude. In fact, I once visited the company during her tenure as president, intending to discuss a contract initiated during her father's time. When I arrived, I witnessed Samantha arguing with her employees. She was passionately explaining the importance of strengthening security and stressing that they should invest in maintenance and inspection. But the employees weren't having it. They were saying things like, "If you're going to spend money, give us a raise instead." I remember it vividly. In the end, the contract fell through, and I didn't meet with Samantha again after that. But I later heard that the company had gone bankrupt. The image of Samantha's determined face as she earnestly tried to win everyone over stuck with me. We had only met once, and yet that image of her repeatedly bowing her head to try and persuade people left a strong impression on me. When I heard that her company had gone under, and she had abandoned her father's name, Nash, and taken on her mother's maiden name, Kirkland, I became curious. A few years later, I was considering a job change when Mr. Obi, the bank's president, invited me to dinner. He had heard I was looking for a new job and headhunted me. Well, I had done my share of selling myself to the bank beforehand, so it wasn't exactly the typical headhunting scenario. Originally, I had planned to take the job at the bank's headquarters, but something Mr. Obi said made me reconsider completely. Our branches really need to strengthen their security soon. If you came on board, it would be a great help. I'd love your advice. We'll start with this branch. Samantha Kirkland is actively pushing for these changes, so it makes sense to start there. There are plenty of people named Nash across the country, so I wasn't sure. But in a way, it was a gamble. Could it be that the former Nash, the woman president I'd met back then, was now going by Kirkland? Maybe I could see her again. That hope drove me to request an assignment at this branch. I kept my previous career hidden, as I mentioned before, to avoid creating waves. That was the only reason. As I finished my story, I glanced over at Samantha, who had been listening intently, and saw that tears were streaming down her face. Had I said something wrong? Maybe bringing up the past was a mistake. Not knowing how to comfort her, especially since I had little experience with women, I panicked and stammered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable by bringing up old memories." As I stepped back, Samantha gently said, "No, that's not it." Her voice was soft and kind, and I breathed a sigh of relief as I raised my head. Samantha, still gripping her cup of sweetened coffee, seemed lost in thought. She looked down for a moment, then raised her head again and gazed straight into my eyes. I froze, caught by her brown eyes as she spoke. "I'm touched that you remembered that young, inexperienced woman who had just become a company president. From your perspective, I must have seemed like a complete novice who didn't even understand the basics of management. Yet, I was arrogantly lecturing you about security. It's laughable, really. There were so many things I should have focused on, but I didn't. In the end, after that, the company's financial troubles deepened, and a security breach led to a data leak. I had to take responsibility, and I closed the company." I held my breath, surprised by this revelation. Suddenly, everything made sense. Samantha's breakdown the day before, her panic. She must have been reliving the trauma from that time. Even a small company can be brought to its knees by a data leak, sometimes leaving behind massive debts. It seems Samantha had distanced herself from her father's name, Nash, because of those debts. Apparently, her father, in a desperate attempt to hide the company's financial troubles, had borrowed money from some shady sources to escape the debt collectors. Samantha had started using her mother's maiden name, Kirkland. Then, Samantha revealed something unexpected. I actually remembered you too. I didn't recognize you at first because you've lost weight and cut your hair short. But back then, when my family was being pointed at and people whispered about our company's impending bankruptcy, not a single person stood by us. Not even when the debt collectors were chasing us. But you showed up for that meeting with me. It made me a little happy, you know. She went on to tell me how she became the head of this department. It turned out that the branch manager here was her relative. Concerned for her well-being, he took her in because he valued her diligence. But Samantha, not wanting to be seen as relying on connections, had put on a tough front, playing the role of the Iron Lady and being strict with everyone, including herself. She had hidden her true self all because she wanted to be recognized for her own abilities. Because I was the branch manager's relative, no one would say anything to my face. But yesterday, Tate, you called me out without caring about that. It really woke me up in more ways than one. Thank you. As I looked at Samantha, her cheeks flushed. I felt as though my heart had been grabbed. It seemed that despite only meeting once before, we had been drawn to each other all along, like opposite poles of a magnet. I said, "Can you stop with the confusing metaphors?" She replied, but she was smiling brighter than I had ever seen her before. The usual look of pressure and responsibility had completely melted away, revealing the true Samantha underneath. Later, the cracker was arrested, but Samantha took responsibility for what had happened and offered to resign. However, everyone convinced her to stay. It was true that Samantha had acted hastily, pressing the button due to the trauma of her previous company's collapse after being hacked. But because of the swift actions that followed, mine included, we were able to avoid the worst-case scenario. So it was agreed with the bosses that Samantha would start over as a regular employee. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief when they heard the news. Mason, too, shared in that relief. If Samantha leaves, this place is doomed, he joked. Strangely enough, I was the one chosen to take over as her replacement. As Mason put it, the fact that someone who was supposed to work at headquarters is a department head at a branch is already unusual, so just roll with it. With encouragement from everyone, including Samantha herself, I didn't really have a choice but to accept being the department head. In a specialized field like risk management, it wasn't easy, and there were times when I had to work overtime. But we had established a flexible and cooperative relationship that made the work rewarding. Even Mason, who had once criticized Samantha's methods, now said, "I guess I should just trust my own judgment. My goal is to establish my own unshakable style, no matter what anyone says," indicating that he had come to understand her way of thinking. Similarly, Samantha had softened. Sometimes working together as a team really is the faster way, she admitted, even apologizing to Mason for being too hard on him in the past. Her ability to acknowledge her mistakes so honestly showed what a kind-hearted person she was. Mason, in turn, promised to be more mindful, avoiding the habit of wandering off or daydreaming at his desk. In this way, we created a space where everyone respected each other's perspectives and values. As a result, I was finally living the peaceful life I had always envisioned.